there guys, how are we doing? Welcome back to my channel, Boomy Reactions. For those of you who are new, my name's Boomy and thank you for watching my lovelies. Now today guys, I'm not really sure what this video is. So it's about something called Killdozer. Not got any idea what a Killdozer is. So this video has been requested through YouTube comments and this is from PlatinumLombax. And you say, can I make a recommendation for something to react to? Of course you can, my lovely. Thank you so much. The video is titled, You Were Lied To About Killdozer. Okay. I don't know if you've ever heard about the Killdozer, but it's an interesting story. And I believe this video gets the details more accurately than most of the other videos about it. Okie dokie. I have no idea what Killdozer is. Is this like kind of maybe a Mr. Ballin-esque kind of video? So Killdozer, like a bulldozer, like a killer bulldozer. Is that, am I off? Am I miles away? I can only assume that's what a Killdozer is. A killer bulldozer. Killdozer, no? Yeah, is this a ghost story? Is it like a real life crime story? I have not got the foggiest idea what this is. So I'm going in blind, guys. So let's see. This is a channel that I have not seen any videos from before. So this is The Law Lodge. Oh, it's quite a long video. So stay with me until the end, guys. I'll try and minimize the talking and keep my chatting to a minimum. So, you know, it doesn't end up like a 2-hour long video. You know what I'm like. So let's give this a watch, guys. Okay, Killdozer, here we go. If you're enjoying these reactions as well, my lovelies, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you so much. If you're interested, I have a Buy Me a Coffee account. That link is over here. And if you would like to help support my channel any further, I have a Patreon account. Oh, yes, I do. And if you want to check that out at all, that link is in the description below there. Okay, Killdozer.
This is the story of a reasonable man who was forced to do unreasonable things. Oh. I'm Aiden Mattis, and welcome back to The Law Lodge.
Hello. A new face. Oh, we have a disclaimer. The video and its contents adhere to the YouTube community guidelines and are protected under the... Oh, okay. We don't need to read this. Maybe we do.
Shortly after 2 p.m. on June 4th, 2004, workers at the Mountain Park concrete plant in Granby, Colorado, heard a commotion coming from the muffler shop next door. Turning to see what it was, they witnessed a behemoth vehicle rolling towards them on massive treads, which they soon realized was a bulldozer, and one covered in thick steel plates. And
oh my gosh, this is it. This is Killdozer. Yeah, killer bulldozer. Or a modified bulldozer. Why was this created? Why? I want to call it abomination, but I don't know what it actually does. Why has this come into existence?
While nobody could see inside, they were all pretty sure that they knew who was controlling it. Marvin Heemeyer. Police tried to destroy the treads, breach the cabin, and shots were even fired at the bulldozer, but no matter what anybody did, they could not stop the thing. Over the course of the next 2 hours, Heemeyer methodically and efficiently carved a path of destruction through Granby, causing over $1 million in property damage. The carnage ended only when the treads of his tank, now affectionately referred to as Killdozer by many, slipped into the basement of a building and rendered him stuck. With his modified Komatsu D355A immobilized and law enforcement all around, Heemeyer chose to go out on his own terms using a .357 handgun. And then something very strange happened. While those who were associated with Marv's targets were quick to call him insane or even a domestic terrorist, some people blamed the town. While of course the people of Granby were shaken, those whose properties were left unscathed by Heemeyer's tank were at least willing to forgive and even to understand.
Okay, this gets even more interesting. So this chap here has modified a bulldozer into Killdozer and has very strategically planned out his route. But why? Why is he just taking Killdozer through people's properties? I hope. Was anyone injured or killed? Why would he do this?
They pointed to a history of animosity between Heemeyer and certain other business owners in the community, some of whom even served on the town board. Zoning disputes, a sewer issue, and just a general sense that Heemeyer was being jerked around were all key aspects of the discourse. And this ultimately culminated in a rather sharp divide in public opinion. In Granby, Heemeyer's actions were generally viewed as at the very least negative and in many cases over the top. But that opinion was not necessarily consistent outside of the town. In nearby...
So there were a fair few people within this town that didn't look at this as totally insane and actually a bit justified? No? That's it's very interesting that the rest of the town have such a fractured opinion and it's so divided. I want to hear more. Give me his backstory.
Grand Lake, where Marv actually lived, those who knew him were surprised that he had gone to these lengths, but ultimately sympathetic to his plight, and they were not the only ones. Across the country, Heemeyer rapidly achieved status as a martyr in anti-government circles. To these people, he was perceived as a hero who stood up against a corrupt system.
Okay, as long as nobody was hurt. No? I lose an awful lot of sympathy for causes like this when people get injured or there's fatalities and then it's not justified at all. You don't need to resort to things like that. Okay. Ooh, the plot is sickening.
His actions were seen not as attacks on innocent people, but as retribution against a corrupt town board that was conspiring against him. However, not everyone saw the situation in quite that same light, and it was in large part due to the work of Patrick Brower, who was the editor at Sky High News, the local Granby paper. Outside of the immediate reporting that was done by local journalists from the surrounding towns and counties, Brower has largely been the only reporter in the area to continue writing about the events of June 4th, 2004 and their causes. If you look at the Wikipedia page for Heemeyer, for example, you'll see that essentially every single citation that deals with the lead up to that day is associated with Patrick Brower.
Interesting. Okay.
What I mean by that is that they were either written by Brower himself, published in the newspaper that Brower edited, or they cite Brower. And along with covering the events in real time, Brower has also created 2 retrospective pieces on the incident. He published Killdozer, the true story of the Colorado bulldozer rampage in 2017, and he was a producer on the 2019 documentary Tread. The narrative stemming from Brower's more recent work is one of a sympathetic and well-liked, but ultimately isolated and paranoid man's wrath against perceived yet non-existent wrongs.
This is a very well-documented incident. How have I never heard of it? I've not heard of it in the slightest. Okay, so 2004. Okay. I'm immediately aware that I have promised to reduce my chattering and I failed by minute 8. Sorry.
One of the issues was related to Marv's sanitation solution, which was essentially just an old cement mixer buried in the ground and hooked up to a septic system. According to Brower, Marv refused to hook onto the sewer system for over a decade, even though the town ordinance required that he do so. And then, when they finally pushed the issue with him in 2002 and gave him a fine, he paid it with a check that was made out to the Cowards and Liars Department. Another issue had to do with zoning disputes, specifically the 2 lots adjacent to Heemeyer's property. Brower wrote that when another landowner went to rezone the adjacent property, Marv was offered $250,000, which he initially accepted. Then, he supposedly jacked the price up to $375,000 when it was time to finalize the sale. And when the purchasers said, hey, we can't afford that, he just refused to negotiate any further. And then when they refused to pay, Heemeyer told them that he would fight their rezoning effort all the way to the end. Finally, Brower wrote on his website that the rumor that Marv was forced to shut down his business by the town board was false. According to Brower, he chose to shut down his business all on his own for no apparent reason other than that he wanted out so he could move forward with his plan to terrorize and bulldoze the town. Thing is, as I went to work trying to corroborate the various claims about the aspects of the Killdozer story, I found that a lot of them didn't quite line up. For example, there are several things on Brower's website that contradict his initial reporting. He'd also present things in a certain way in Tread, but I'd find that he'd either omitted or altered details.
Oh, they always do, don't they? Okay, I'm trying to keep up to speed here as best as I can.
In this process, I came to realize that the narrative crafted by Brewer, whether he did it deliberately or not, did not seem to be accurate based on the available facts. Now, I can't speak to his motivation or really that of anyone else involved in the legend of Killdozer, but what I can do is tell you everything that the media left out.
Okay, guys. I'm trying to keep up as best I can because I don't know the story, the original story going forward into this one. So, the gentleman that created Killdozer. So, am I right in thinking this initial conflict has come about because where this man's shop is? I think what is it that he does? I was listening, honestly. I don't think I caught what is it that he does. And the council, the town council, the city council, have decided to rezone the land in order to allow a cement factory, to processing facility, whatever it is, to be built next to his shop, store, place of work, workshop. And this has caused problems for him, so he's fought it all the way. Initially, he's accepted like a buyout and accepted $250,000, but at the last minute, he's bumped the price up. Now, what are the reasons why he's bumped the price up? He's not daft, is he? But there could have been more legal fees. There could have been other expenses that have been a bit foreseen up until that point. So he's had to put the price up. Okay. And in the process of this cement facility being built, there's been unreasonable charges and a lot of things, kind of fines and such against this gent here. What's his name? I've forgot his name already. And one of which is to do with not being connected to the sewer lines because he was keeping his storage in a cement mixer. That's a bit gross. Okay, am I up to speed? So, okay. He's a reasonable man. Okay.
Marvin John Heemeyer was born to South Dakota dairy farmers John and Augusta Heemeyer in 1951. He spent his youth in the Mount Rushmore state and then enlisted in the Air Force in 1971 at the age of 20. He first arrived in Colorado in 1974 when he was stationed at Lowry Air Force Base. Now, it's unclear what Heemeyer's military occupational specialty, or MOS, basically your job in the military. We're not really sure what that was. I don't have access to his records. And it's also unclear exactly when he got out of the military, but what we do know is that he stayed in Colorado or returned to Colorado, where he went into the muffler repair business. And like I said, while I couldn't track down what his MOS was, that does suggest to me that he probably was involved in welding. By 1990...
muffler repair, a muffler. What's a muffler? Is it something to do with car exhausts? Do we call them something different over here? Why don't I... Not that I claim to have an awful lot of knowledge on cars, but what is a muffler? It is a car part, isn't it? Okay, so maybe he was, I don't know, was he like a mechanic of some sort in the services?
Marv was doing very well for himself and wanted to take some time off, so he leased out the business to another repairman by the name of Doug Brandstetter so that he could take 6 months off, go get away, and, focus on his real passion, which was snowmobiling.
Nice.
And also snowmobile modification. Heemeyer decided that he would spend November of 1991 through May of 1992 in Grand Lake, Colorado, a small town with a population of just 170 people in 1990.
This makes sense why he would assume that his profession in the military was welding. Okay, it would appear that he's very proficient at welding with all the vehicle mods.
Marv spent those 6 months in Grand Lake immersing himself in this small mountainside town culture, enjoying the lakeside views, the snowmobiling, and getting to know several people in town. It seemed he really enjoyed being up there, and that worked out because when it came time for that vacation to end, Doug Brandstetter was doing very well for himself down in Boulder and asked if he could extend his lease. Heemeyer obliged him and then made the choice to settle down in Grand Lake for a little while and just see what the area had to offer. He purchased a modest cabin property on Woodpecker Hill, a community on the north side of Grand Lake, in early 1992. I will tell you, trying to locate where Woodpecker Hill is in the town of Grand Lake took me 3 hours, and I'm still not confident I was right. It does appear that the town has undergone a rather significant amount of growth, at least structurally, since 1992. It's entirely possible that there are neighborhoods that existed in 1992 and also in 2004 that are just gone now because they've been redeveloped. But in any case, it didn't really take Marv all that long to integrate fully into the community. One of the people who saw him most frequently was Lori Crane, the owner of a Polaris snowmobile store near his home. And according to her, Marv was a friendly and loyal customer who was in there bright and early every day during the winter to talk snowmobiles. And that made sense because Marv knew most of his friends in Grand Lake from snowmobiling. Specifically, he fell in with a group who called themselves the Thursday Club, and this was about 24 riders who would get together and go out snowmobiling on, as you might expect, Thursday.
They're like bikers, but snowmobiles. That's cool.
Spencer, who was a member of the Thursday Club, described Marv as his best friend and told the team behind the 2019 documentary Tread, I looked at him as my bigger brother, and that I let Marv lead unless it was someplace I knew better than him. And as for how Marv handled social situations, Spencer was pretty clear. He said that he never heard Marv talk bad about anybody but the people who did him bad. So Marv, not a gossip, not the kind of guy to just idly talk trash. And by all accounts, a pretty phenomenal snowmobiler. But Marv didn't just ride snowmobiles, he also worked on them. According to Thursday Club member Matt Reed, people would take their rigs to Marv, who would take stock steel and bend it custom to every machine, and he did this to form a bumper. And according to Spencer, these bumpers were so strong that a rider could plow through trees 4 to 5 inches thick. And according to Matt Reed, his work was so valued that you weren't a snowmobiler in Grand Lake unless you had a Marv bumper. It's also...
Okay, he's getting quite the name for himself here, isn't he? Okay, a very, very proficient, and that's to say the least, excellent with modifying snowmobiles. You'd imagine he would have to have an awful lot of experience to be very, very good at welding if he's created the Killdozer. So naturally,
clear from the comments of people that knew him that Marv wasn't only liked for his reliability as a customer or his skill as a welder. He was just genuinely a good guy. Reed, for example, joined the group when he was just 16, and according to him, Marv took him under his wing, helped teach him how to snowmobile and work on snowmobiles, and he went on to say that he was always a mentor and always helped, always gave. Yeah. And according to a June 10th, 2004 article by a Tanya Bina at Sky High News, Thursday Club member Bruno Schroeder described Marv as the type of guy who would give you the shirt off his back. That same article cites another part owner of Lori Crane's snowmobile shop in Grand Lake, Alan Bender, as saying that Marv was very intuitive and that if he noticed you were having a bad day, he would find a way to cheer you up. And this...
okay. So by all accounts, Marv is a nice, rational, kind man. He's not malicious. He doesn't appear to be very vengeful. And there's enough people giving these kind of statements and, attesting to his character. Okay.
Positive opinion even extended to Grand Lake residents who didn't always agree with Marv. Former Grand Lake Mayor Gene Stover remarked that Heemeyer would have a smile on his face when he saw you, even if he didn't like you. During his time in Grand Lake, Marv was vocal in town politics, and on several occasions, he butted heads with the mayor on certain issues. But Stover told Sky High News that even though they butted heads on political issues, Heemeyer would still eat at his restaurant, the Lariat Saloon. And the Lariat Saloon is also where Heemeyer met his long-term girlfriend, Trisha McDonald. McDonald described Heemeyer as old school, a handshake's a handshake kind of guy, remarking that society doesn't allow that anymore. She went on to say, he was confident and I thought he was handsome and he was larger than life. I felt safe with him. He was wonderful to me. And it wasn't just Trisha McDonald who thought that Marv was a great guy. Glenn Traynor, who was undersheriff of Grand County during the incident in 2004, remarked that Marv had a great reputation in town and that he didn't ever meet anybody who disliked him. So you might wonder how it is that a man with that kind of reputation could go and do something like this. And the people of Grand Lake wondered about that too. After the incident on June 4th, 2004, former Mayor Stover told Sky High News, he was wound a little bit tight, but I never anticipated anything like this. Something pushed him off the edge. An unnamed member of the Thursday Club was quoted as saying, I knew he was not happy in Granby anymore. I heard about his problems with the town council. That same member also referred to the 6'2" tall Heemeyer as a gentle giant and said that he'd spoken to Marv just a month prior to what happened and got no indication that Marv had any plans to do something like this.
So yes, this is the information that maybe we don't get to hear from the media. Maybe there is a bias there. I don't actually have any idea because I am very new to this story. But yeah, by all accounts, he seems like a genuinely nice guy. To say he's wound up a little tight, and to say that he butts heads with like town councillors. He strikes me as someone who was passionate about the future of his town, where the finances and the expenses are going. If there is anything that doesn't quite add up and seem right, or he seems like the kind of person that is going to speak up and take it seriously. But at the same time, he still say hi to you if he sees you on the street, and he doesn't have an issue with you outside of that. So very, very interesting. I'm glad they've started with this kind of character profile. So it gives you a bit of an insight without making a judgment before I've heard the rest of the story. Okay.
That he had any plans to not be there after June 4th.
Okay.
The presiding mayor in Grand Lake in 2004, Judy Burke, was even sympathetic, telling Sky High News, "I always thought he was okay. To think about somebody so alone, with no one to talk to the point that he had to do something like this." Of course, Marv knew a lot of people in Grand Lake, and he wasn't exactly the kind of guy to keep his opinions to himself, so many of them knew about the issues he was having in Granby, but most of them didn't realize precisely how affected Marv was. And while Granby's town board was quick to emphasize that Marv's retribution had put a lot of people in danger, specifically law enforcement and even children, Grand Lake Mayor Judy Burke pointed out that Marv seemed to have deliberately avoided putting any innocent people in danger. That same Sky High article quotes her as saying he didn't plan to hurt anyone, he had it planned so everyone saw him coming and could get out of the way in time. The only one he ended up hurting, besides financially, was himself. Still, it could seem like a bit of an overreaction to a zoning dispute, a sewage issue, and a fine, right?
I mean, okay, so I've got the answer to my question. So no one was hurt. In fact, Heemeyer went out of his way to make sure, a lot of people were aware that this was going to happen and to get out of the way. Okay. Is it an overreaction? I suppose that depends on what was at stake, what was it costing Heemeyer, because, okay, to say it's just a fine, well, what was the fine? Because, if he was going to be compensated $250,000 and then he bumped the price up, and yeah, okay. But he was fined for certain things. I don't know what was the expense of the fines, because even to a small business owner, to come out with fines of like thousands of dollars or hundreds of thousands, you're talking about the make or break of a business. That's your livelihood. So yes, that's something that it's going to cost you a lot. You're going to be very, very emotional and very angry about these things. So I'm sure they're going to tell us all about it now.
So why did Marv feel that all of this was necessary?
Yeah.
How did his perception of events differ so drastically that this decision made sense to him?
That's what I want to know. The auction. Okay.
Whatever you want to call a man like Marv Heemeyer, you would expect him to be the sort of man to leave behind a manifesto.
Yeah, I'm reserving judgment right now.
And he did, just not in the typical format. Rather than committing his thoughts to paper, Marv recorded nearly 3 hours of monologues, describing in detail what led him to his decision, why it was justified, and how it could have been prevented. Now, I could not find a full transcript of Marvin Heemeyer's tapes anywhere, so what I did was download the audio, find an AI transcription tool called TurboScribe, paid $120 for the annual subscription. No, this is not a sponsored segment, I'm just telling you what I did. Then I downloaded the text, and then I formatted it, edited out. There were certain parts where like the transcription software missed something he said, just edited it for clarity and for formatting, didn't take anything out, didn't change any words, just made sure it all fit. And then I used that and compared it to the narrative given in the media, but particularly by Brower in his books, his articles, and in the movie Tread. And if
his research into this is so above and beyond it, that like fair play.
If you would like to read that transcript yourself, you can do so by going onto our Patreon and subscribing for just $1 a month. We'll also be posting it for YouTube members. I'll also be uploading a copy of the notes I used for this video to the Patreon if you guys would like to check it out, and that one, of course, will also go to YouTube members. But anyway, according to Marv, the trouble all started with an acquaintance of his by the name of John Kleiner. Kleiner and Heemeyer knew each other through the repair business, and they would go snowmobiling together on occasion as well. Not long after Marv had made his move to Grand Lake permanent, John Kleiner approached him and said that he was looking to open a garage in the area. Marv looked around for a bit, and eventually he located a property at 723 County Road 612 in Granby. The attractive part of the lot was a 3,000 square foot warehouse equipped with 3 large bay doors, making it perfect for an auto shop. The property had fallen into the hands of the Resolution Trust Corporation after the former owner went bankrupt in the 1980s.
Right.
And that's something I want to quickly explain. In the late 80s, a number of economic and regulatory factors led to a crash in the lending market that is typically known as the savings and loan crisis. During the course of the crisis, a number of savings and loan associations, which typically handle personal loans, mortgages, auto loans, things like that, nearly a third of these shut down across the United States. The closure of many banks in turn created a situation in which borrowers had no means of paying their debt as there was no bank to pay. Heemeyer suggested in his tapes that as a result of this situation, a number of people thought that their loans, their debt simply didn't exist anymore, and they went and they spent money that they should have been holding back for the loans. In reality, these loans had never been canceled or even formally paused. So when the FDIC came in and tried to rectify the situation and recover the debt, they wanted a lot of money that people didn't have.
Of course.
With many borrowers unable to pay this back debt, the banks went and foreclosed their properties, which ultimately went to auction. One of those properties was a concrete plant owned by Granby local Cody Dochev. And this concrete plant included the 3,000 square foot warehouse that Marvin wanted to buy. Heemeyer asked what the bank would sell it for pre-auction, but the $110,000 price tag attached to it was more than he was willing to pay. Heemeyer and Kleiner talked it over and decided that the most they were willing to spend was $66,000, and the plan was that Marv would purchase the property and then finance it to John. John would then operate the business and use part of the revenue to pay Marv back. Essentially, Marv was giving him a loan, but taking out the step of giving John the money first. Marv attended...
Is this all in writing? Is this an agreed upon contract? Because it sounds like someone might be doing the dirty and about to weasel out, maybe.
The auction, and when his chosen lot came up for bid, someone up front jumped up and immediately put down $35,000. That someone, as it turned out, was Cody Dochev. When he had lost the property, which he bought in 1972 during the savings and loan crisis of the late 80s, Dochev had been ruined financially, and a number of people in Granby lost their jobs. Cody had friends in high places, and one of those was former Granby Mayor Gus Harris. And Gus Harris had agreed to loan Dochev a certain amount of money to buy back his property. Heemeyer, of course, did not know any of this at the time. He says that when he found out that it was a foreclosure sale, he went and he talked to the realtor, Jeff Crane, and he asked, is the former owner going to try and buy the property back? And Crane said he didn't know and directed him to another realtor by the name of Peter Colley. Peter Colley was in the same boat. He didn't know if the former owner was going to try and buy the property back, which would imply then that the former owner, Cody Dochev, had not approached the realtors about purchasing the property back from the bank. So there was no way that Marv could have known when he got to the auction that he would be bidding against the former owner.
Okay, so I mean, it doesn't sound like there's any maliciousness going on so far. It's just a case of the circumstances are very up in the air and no one really seems to know anything. Why would the former mayor be prepared to upfront money for the original owner to purchase a bid back for his business? Because he's his friend? What? It's got to be some kind of gay in there. Come on.
Fortunately, he found himself doing precisely that. Heemeyer put down $40,000, then Dochev $45,000, and finally Heemeyer says he put down $50,000 and there was no counterbid from up front. Then, just after the auction, he says that Dochev approached him and just introduced himself, kind of, by just giving me a tongue lashing for about 10 minutes about, you know, who I thought I was and what I was going to do with the property. Heemeyer did not take kindly to Dochev's attitude, but tried to explain the situation, which was that he had offered to buy the property for John Kleiner for $66,000, but since it had been Cody's property, and, you know, he understood Cody's frustration, he offered to sell it to Cody for $66,000. The same.
Okay, that's he's not doing anything massively wrong here. He's trying to be reasonable and a good guy about it. So now what he's offering to buy it from, I keep forgetting names. There's an awful lot of information in trying my best to retain it.
same price he was going to get from John. But the problem here was that Cody Dochev had not secured a loan for $66,000. Secured a loan for $50,000. Nonetheless, Marv wouldn't budge, not out of any sort of malice, but just because it was business. He was going to get $66,000 from one guy. Why would he take $50,000 from another? But as I was cross-checking everything for this video, I realized that this portion of the narrative differs significantly from the one presented in Tread. Around 23 minutes into the documentary, Patrick Brower, the editor of Sky High News, the local Granby paper, plays a recording from an interview he did with Dochev. In the interview, Dochev says that he doesn't even think he met Marv that day, and that after the auction had ended, he and Gus just left. Brower then presses him and says, well, Marv said in his tapes that you guys talked that day. And once again, Dochev just denies it and says, no, we didn't get to talking. Brower.
Why? Okay, this is going to start getting a bit hairy, isn't it? Why would he lie about that? What's the purpose for it? Is it Dotrieve, the gent whose business it was, and he's trying to buy it back. Why would he lie and say that he had never spoken to Hugh Meyer? But Hugh Meyer, Marv, has no reason to lie at the time. He's got no reason to lie about that. So I don't think he has.
Then follows this up by saying that Gus Harris didn't have any recollection of the conversation either. Harris said that after the concrete bid, he and Cody sat there for another minute, but ultimately they just ended up leaving. He then went on to say, I don't know what Marv did. I wasn't paying attention to him really. We just got up and left. Yeah. The contradiction is important on its own, but what really caught my eye was a claim made by Harris. Harris says that he and Cody had been friends for many years and had even gone to auctions together. But this time, he said that Cody had no party in the auction. He added that Cody would maybe be interested in the property at a future time, but there was no agreement or talk between us of him owning that property. That didn't sound right to me, and it was because of something that Patrick Brower said around 8 minutes and 50 seconds into the YouTube version of the documentary. Brower said that the Dochefs were looking for land upon which to put this concrete operation with an indoor batch plant. Additionally, he said, Dochev also showed up with Gus Harris. It's not mentioned that Cody once owned that concrete plant, which is an omission that is notable but could have been accidental. Or at least on my first watch through Tread, I thought, all right, well, that could have been an accident. And while this doesn't necessarily...
I don't know. I think with these guys, I don't think there's accidents. I think they're very rehearsed in the information that they're giving at certain points and what they're strategically leaving out and fibbing about.
Really translate to Gus Harris was there to buy land for Cody Dochev, it made me suspicious enough to dig. As it turns out, Patrick Brower was a hell of a lot more straightforward in his initial reporting. In a June 17, 2004 article, Brower wrote the following. The story of Marv's relationship with the Dochev family started when Heemeyer bought the 2-acre parcel for his mountain muffler business in 1992. The land was bought at auction from the Resolution Trust Corporation, which administers the holding of failed banks. The Dochefs had owned the property but lost it to the bank after previous business plans for the area failed. When the land went to auction, a friend and business associate of the Dochefs had hoped to buy the property so that he could sell it back to the Dochefs at a later time. Cody Dochev had wanted to own land in that area in western Granby because his concrete batch plant operation was being operated on land that he was leasing from the Thompson family, located on a mesa north of the current batch plant. Dochev wanted his plant to be on land he owned. The purchase of the land by the friend to be sold back to the Dochefs would have started that process, but a man named Marv Heemeyer showed up at the auction and outbid Harris, buying the 2-acre parcel for $42,000. While it's worth noting that Marv had the numbers wrong, he said that he bought it for $50,000 when in reality it was $42,000, the vastly more important piece is that Brower's earlier journalism, taken from interviews with the Dochefs themselves, directly contradicts Harris's claim that Cody wasn't a party to the bid. I mean, technically, Gus Harris didn't lie. He said that Cody wasn't a party to the bid, which means that Cody was not bidding that day. He was not putting in any of his own money that day. It doesn't mean there wasn't an agreement between Gus Harris and Cody Dochev for Gus to buy the property at auction and Cody to pay him back later. Essentially, he was being factual but not truthful. And that's where I began to wonder if the omission of the fact that Cody once owned the plant earlier in the documentary was not an accident, but rather a deliberate narrative choice. But in any case, Marv had a problem. While at the auction, it was revealed that the EPA had placed an audit on the property due to some oil spills, and the cleanup that they recommended would have cost $20,000. When John Kleiner learned of this after the sale was finalized, he got cold feet and told Heemeyer he no longer wanted the property. And Marv, being the kind of guy to take a man at his word, hadn't really required a formal contract or even a deposit for the property, which meant that John Kleiner was in no way legally obligated to pay him back.
Fulfill.
And this left Marv as the owner of a property that he didn't even want, which was also under an EPA audit, the cleanup for which would have cost him a small fortune. He did eventually learn that the FDIC and then the Resolution Trust Company had done a good amount of the cleanup themselves, so it wasn't going to be nearly as expensive.
Oh, okay.
But still not the ideal situation to be in. So, making the most of this poor situation, Marvin spent the summer of 1992 trying to get the property cleaned up so that he could figure out what he was going to do with it. And it was during that summer that Heemeyer met Bud Wilson, who was the superintendent of the Granby Sanitation and Water Department.
Oh, this is the beginning of the sewer issue. Okay, so far, Heemeyer hasn't done anything wrong. He hasn't done anything bad. I think he is a good guy, and he's gone unknowingly into a situation where, you know, I don't know. At this point, I don't think it's necessarily that he's been tricked. I think it's a combination of at this point, I think he's very trusting. He's, you know, he takes people at their word. And this other chap is backed out after learning of the cleanup cost. Why would oh my gosh, how do I word this? They're not estate agents, what are they? Like the realtors that were selling it for, okay, whichever. Why would they not have any idea of the, it's so difficult to ask these questions when I'm forgetting names. The one I keep calling Dotrieve. His name's not Dotrieve. What is it? The original buyer of the cement place, the original owner that lost it to the banks. How would they not have any clue that he was interested in buying it back? Is that weird that they wouldn't know that? It just sounds like a mess, doesn't it? I think it's just like the perfect combination. It's like the perfect storm of people not being in the know, not having the right information, and just a number of different parties wanting to bid on this land, and a perfect storm. But so far, no one's been malicious?
According to Marv, Wilson came to him during the summer and asked him to hook onto the town's sewer system. And Marv, being on the old rudimentary improvised septic tank that Dochev had installed on the property earlier, he just kind of went along with it. He said, yeah, sure, what do I need to do? Do I need an attorney? You know, let's make it happen. And Wilson said, no attorney. In fact, I'll do all the paperwork. I will get everything in order for you. When you show up to the meeting, all you got to do is sign and pay the fee. Heemeyer was all for it. It wasn't going to cost him a ton of money, and it was going to make his life a little bit easier. But when he got to the meeting, he was surprised to find that when Wilson said he'd get it all taken care of, he hadn't gotten it all taken care of. At the meeting, the board told Marvin Heemeyer that he needed to get a maintenance easement from his neighbor. And a maintenance easement is essentially formal written consent for the town's staff, their sewer people, to come and install and then maintain a sewer line on private property. This was necessary because the sewer main did not actually run adjacent to Marv's property at any point. So the nearest place that they could hook Marv onto the sewer system was across the property directly south of him. And that property was owned by Gus Harris. Marv said in his tapes that the maintenance easement thing upset him because he had been told that this would all be taken care of. And he also says that Bud Wilson and Gus Harris were good friends, so, you know, this just really all rubbed him the wrong way. It upset him so much, in fact, that he decided, you know what, screw it, I'm not going to hook onto the sewer system anyway. I'm just going to keep using the septic tank. It's legal. It's not causing any problems for me. You know, I'm just not going to deal with this. But Marv's response, even just looking at his own account, doesn't really seem to make sense. But there might be some further context to consider here. First of all, it seems like Marv had two options. He could either get the maintenance easement from Gus Harris, or he could pay out of pocket to add a connection to the sewer main at the next nearest point. If he took this route, then the town would install the new sewer line under the road adjacent to his property that led out to the highway. Thing is, that was a considerable distance, and it was going to cost between $60,000 and $80,000. Considering that he only paid $42,000 for the property in the first place, and that there was no ordinance that required him to connect to the sewer system in order to continue operating his business, he didn't see the value in that option. The other possibility of the easement would seem less complicated, But there may be more to Marv's reaction than just irritation with bureaucracy. And this is actually something that does come up in Tread. In 1992, Ron Thompson was VP of the Sanitation District, and he was one of the leaders of the meeting that night. And the Thompsons are, as Brower puts it, a Granby legacy family, a wealthy working family making their money off excavation, but also off of the fact that they owned a lot of land just because they'd been here forever. It should also be mentioned that in addition to Ron Thompson being vice president of the sanitation board, his father Dick Thompson was mayor of the town. As for Ron, Patrick Brower described him as pretty outspoken in the board meetings and suggested he may have said some things that upset Marv at that meeting. Perhaps most consequentially, he also implies that Thompson may have taken a leadership role in making the decisions they made. When it came to this event, within this series of events that led to June 4th, 2004, there's no more information. That's it. That's all we get is Marv says, they told me I needed the maintenance easement, and then they wouldn't give me the maintenance easement. Based on Marv's tapes, it starts to seem like he wasn't told, you need to go get this easement, but he was told, you can't have this easement. If you look closely at Marv's accounting of events and then at Brower's commentary, it does seem like maybe this was just a misunderstanding. Marv says that he was told Gus Harris would not give the town an easement, and that unless he got the easement, he was never getting connected to the sewer. It may be that what Thompson was trying to express was, hey Marv, we're happy to link you up to the sewer, but the town actually can't go get the easement. You have to do that. You have to go get it from Harris. The town can't get the easement. And it may be that Marv interpreted this as meaning Harris won't grant the easement. The way it's kind of framed in Brower's accounting of events, it seems like Marv was just annoyed that he had another step that he had to go do and decided, well, instead of doing homework, I'm gonna, just go and keep operating my business as usual.
I suppose this could have been a misunderstanding, but from what I've heard about Heemeyer, he doesn't seem like the kind of person that will make a huge assumption based on a statement and run away with it and get his wires crossed. And I don't know. See, normally when things like this are decided and big decisions are made, there's normally money at the root of it, isn't there? Or mates, rates, payments, backhanders.
I don't need to be attached to the sewer. It doesn't do anything for me, and there's no ordinance against me not being on it.
So why
Alternatively,
would you?
if we look at what Brower said about Thompson, which is that he may have said some things that upset Marv at that meeting, then it's not really a jump to suggest that Heemeyer said, well, I was told all of this was going to be taken care of. What do you mean I need to go get an easement?
Yeah.
You guys asked me to hook onto the sewer. You told me you would do everything. I just had to sign. Like, what's going on? What gives? Then it could be that, maybe Thompson didn't really like being talked back to, and it turned into an argument, and suddenly we've blown past the misunderstanding, and now we're into the territory of two more like alpha male types who are trying to assert their dominance. But you would think that at some point, if that's what was going on, cooler heads would have prevailed, that somebody would have talked one or both of the men down.
And someone would have interjected, and they were just like, okay, guys, I think there's been a misunderstanding, so let's just clarify. This has been said and this. I can't believe that someone has just come away from this meeting based on a misunderstanding. And I don't know, there's just been huge consequences to it. Things are very ironed out in these meetings. They're normally documented, minutes are taken, everything is kept in black and white. So any decisions made, it's very clear. No? Is it not that organized?
If not that day, then, maybe Bud Wilson, who was on good terms with everybody, could have gone to Heemeyer and said, hey man, I'm sorry about this. I'll set up the meeting between you and Harris. You can go get the easement and we'll be good to go.
Why didn't that happen
then?
You would
think that would have happened. And the fact that it didn't left me open to the possibility that maybe there was more to this. While Heemeyer never explicitly connects this to the issue of the sewer hookup, he does explain that 2 months after he bought the property, he had bought it in April of 1992, so in June of 1992, he had approached Gus Harris with an offer to buy the 2 acres south of what would become Mountain View Muffler. Harris said he'd be willing to sell for $17,500, and Heemeyer said he'd think about it, but at the time he felt he was financially spread too thin and didn't go for it. But then he says less than a year later, he decided he was going to buy the property, and he goes to Harris and he says, hey, I'd like to buy it. Is the $17,500 offer still on the table? And he says that Harris said, no, actually now it's going up to $20,000. Heemeyer was not a fan of this. He felt it was a little underhanded. Nothing about the property had changed, but said, you know what, fine, I'll take it. And then something a little weird happened. Every time Marv tried to formalize this sale, Harris was nowhere to be found. He kept getting out of it. He couldn't sign the paperwork. He wasn't home, just couldn't do it. Marv says he even went to Harris's wife and said, hey, can you help me organize this so we can get this deal done? And eventually he just had to let it go, according to Marv, because he didn't want to push. He just got here. He did not want to cause problems in a small town where he was the newcomer.
He's read the room. It's very obvious that Gus doesn't actually have any intention of going through with this sale for whatever reason. And Marv he doesn't want to push it. He's read the room.
What he said, he was like, all right, well, you know what? I don't need the land. It's easier for me to just let this go now and not piss anybody off. But that whole episode made me wonder if perhaps what happened here is that Marv was told by Bud Wilson, hey, I'll handle everything. All you need to do is sign and pay. Marv Heemeyer says, all right, cool, goes to the meeting. And then when it comes time to sign and pay, he's told, hey, you also need this maintenance easement. And he goes, what do you mean I need a maintenance easement? You guys told me you were handling all the paperwork. And the town maybe then tells him, well, yeah, all the paperwork we could, but maybe Bud Wilson forgot to mention you also needed to go to Harris yourself because we can't do that. And if you put yourself into Marv's shoes, what he was just told was, hey, buddy, in order to hook yourself up to the sewer, you're going to need to go get a maintenance easement from a guy who's been dodging you for 3 months. And if you've ever dealt with any level of government, you probably know how painful the process is and how the entire time, all you want to do is be done with it. Yeah. And Marv was already a little bit on the anti-government side, He had expressed to people that he wasn't a huge fan of bureaucracy.
At this point, we're being very polite. I'd be furious. I'd be fuming. You don't need to go through these lengths, so why would you? You've been told, come along to this meeting. It's really straightforward. What you've got to do is sign, pay the money, good to go. No, it's not that straightforward. There's other hurdles to jump over. There's other hoops to jump through. I would personally, if it was me, I would be annoyed, to say the least. I'd be furious at this point.
So with all of that in mind, you can imagine how standing there, he might go, you know what, screw this. I'm out. I'm just not going to do this and leave.
It's more hassle than it's worth.
Looking through Marv's tapes, reading through them, I don't get the sense that at this point in time, he felt that he was being targeted in any sort of organized way. But just that he was kind of being given the runaround because he was from out of town. And he also thought that maybe this was kind of retribution for him buying the property out from under Cody. That now they were going to make him go and pay a lot of money to connect himself to the sewer line. But if Heemeyer thought that he had washed his hands of this whole situation, that was not exactly the case. You see, when Bud Wilson filed that paperwork for him, what he was doing was filing a formal request to join the city's sanitation district, which meant that he was putting himself under their ordinances. After Marv stormed out of the meeting and said, you know what, I'm not doing this anymore, whatever, forget about it, I'll just stick with my septic system, he never filed a withdrawal of that request. And that meant that at any time, so long as Heemeyer remained unconnected to the sewer system, the town could come to him and find him in contempt of ordinance. And if they did, they could fine him or go so far as to tell him to close down his business.
Why were at this point, after the meeting, very, very swiftly after this meeting has adjourned, why would they not make him aware of this? I feel like it's their responsibility to make him aware at this point. Because how would you know that? I feel like Marv is making his intentions very clear at any given point in this story. And there are other people that are withholding details. It feels kind of intentional. You know, are they looking for excuses to fine him? Are they on some really childlike level punishing him because they haven't got the owner of that land that they wanted for whatever reason? I don't know. You know, it feels like a punishment very early on in this story. I can see it. I can see why this would have angered Heemeyer. The escalation.
Taking stock of the situation, Marv decided that the best course of action was to let Doug Brandstetter keep running the shop down in Boulder, while he himself would start to try and build up a business in Granby. He named his new operation Mountain View Muffler and began taking clients in early 1993. From there, he quickly built up a reputation of being, in the words of then Undersheriff of Grand County Glenn Traynor, the best welder around. Casey Farrell, the owner of Gamble's Appliances and a town board member from 1997 to 1999, also used to go to Marv for his repairs and his welds. He recalled one instance where the box on a delivery truck of his kept bouncing up and down while they drove it, and says that he took it to Marv, and Marv very quickly welded it, fixed it, and the truck never needed another repair for that system ever again. And a friend of Marv's by the name of Pete Mitchell even said that he could swap a muffler out entirely in 20 minutes. He described it as Marv having no wasted movements. It was like a fluid start to finish. He did everything perfectly. By 1994, Marv felt that things were going well enough that he could invest, he could expand his business. And the way he planned to do that was by building a boat storage warehouse on the property. The plan was that he would then lease this out to locals to pay for its construction, and by the time he was ready to retire, it would be just a nice little bit of retirement income. He had a 50-foot by 120-foot warehouse designed, which would hold 3 2,000 square foot storage units. And each of these units would be accessible by a private personnel door as well as a bay door. And because he knew that he was in a bit of a weird situation with the sewer system, he made sure to keep Bud Wilson appraised of everything that was going on. And Bud did tell him throughout the process and over the next couple of years, you know, hey man, you're eventually gonna need to hook onto the sewer system. It will eventually happen. But it never did. So Marv just kind of kept on keeping on. At the time, everybody in town was coming to him for repairs. He wasn't really causing any trouble. So, you know, he figured, what do I have to worry about? It's not like they have any reason to come crack down on me, and I'm not hurting anybody. In any case, the building was finished by the fall of 1994, and by the end of the next year, he had all 3 units leased out. And that was a good thing, because while this shop was doing decently well and bringing in a good passive income, the shop in Boulder wasn't going too hot. Doug Brandstetter was having issues, so he decided that he would go find himself a new Doug. And I mean that literally. He went and found another guy named Doug Davis. And because Doug 1.0 had been
literally went out and found himself another Doug.
struggling to make payments towards the end of his lease, he gave Doug 2.0 a slightly better deal, hoping that he wouldn't have to find a new person to run the shop, at least not soon. For a while, things just kind of went along. Mountain View Muffler was making a steady profit, the shop in Boulder was doing well, and nobody was bugging him about the sewer connection. And things looked like they might get even better when in 1997, Cody Docheff approached Marv with an offer to buy the property. Docheff had just purchased the 2 acres south of Marv's shop from Gus Harris, now he wanted to expand into the land he had formerly owned. Marv said, sure, let's talk about it, and had an appraiser come down from Grand Lake who valued the property at $270,000. As a sign of goodwill, Marv offered the property to Cody for $250,000, cutting $20,000 off the appraised value.
Is this the same property that that was going to auction years before? That Marv had bought instead of this chap, and now he wants it back, but it's been valued at a much higher value. Is that right?
Then gave Cody a copy of the appraisal and waited for the man to come back with a counteroffer. But Cody never did. And here we encounter another place where the version of events given in the documentary Tread diverges from that given by Heemeyer. According to Dick Brody, a town board member from 1995 to 2001, Cody agreed to pay the $250,000, and then immediately afterwards, Marv jumped the price up to $375,000.
Now, straight away, we know that Gus has done that to Marv, so I'm inclined to believe, I don't think he would do that. He doesn't sound like someone who is willing to put finances above decency. Unless there's solid evidence to show that he did actually do this, I'm inclined to think that sounds out of character because he's had it happen to him.
Dick then says that Cody agreed to pay the higher number, and then Marv just kind of backed out. There are also some other accounts that go so far as to say that Marv hiked the price up yet again to $450,000.
Who says
but
that,
that's not exactly accurate, and we'll get there. Actually, you know what? It's not that far in the future. I'll tell you this. He put it up for auction at one point and started the bidding at $450,000. He didn't tell Cody Dochev, all right, well, now that you've agreed to $375, it's $450. No. Years later, he put it up for auction at $450. But
if it was valued years later, I mean, he's not obligated to sell it to Cody at this point in time for the same price years later. If he thinks that someone may be prepared to pay even more money for it through an auction, he's got no obligation there. So I don't think that's a fair thing to say at all.
Going back to the story at hand here, to make matters more confusing, Patrick Brower's 2004 reporting once again differs from what is said in Tread. According to Brower, the price change only occurred 2 years later, after the Dochefs had requested a zoning change to the property. Heemeyer's tapes corroborate this, which means that this was not immediately like Brody had said. This was years between these offers. And it should also be considered that, as Brower notes, there was never a formal agreement for a sale. There was no contract, no formal offers, none of that.
No.
It was just a handshake. There's also another difference in Brower's 2004 recounting of events, which is that it was Joe Dochev, not Cody, who approached Marv about buying the land. Now, I tried to track down who Joe would be, and things rather quickly got weird. I was able to find a Cody Dochev associated with a Joe Dochev, as well as a Susie Dochev. And Cody Dochev was married to a Susie. But as for Cody Dochev, his real name wasn't Cody, it was Metro. Metro and his wife Susie had a daughter named Brenda Lee who died in 2003. And in Brenda Lee's obituary, it lists Metro and Susie as parents, and then it also lists Frank, Charlie, and Joe as siblings. As for grandparents, it lists a Metro and a Helen. Now I wanted to do some more digging to make sure that I wasn't mixing up two Dochev families with at least two matching names in the state of Colorado, which was unlikely but possible. And what I eventually found was that this Metro, this Cody guy, was one of 4 children born to a Metro senior and a Helen Dochev. Their other children were named Jim, Theodora, and Elaine. So this confirmed that, yes, this Joe is Cody/Metro's son. But then, you know, I'm a little nosy. I want to do some more digging. So I tracked down Jim Dochev, who runs a dairy farm in Colorado as well, with his wife Judy and their 5 sons. John, Joe, Jim Jr., Justin, and Jay. Yes, both Cody and his brother Jim have sons named Joe. And of course, I initially assumed that something was miswritten. Somebody misrecorded something at some point here, right? And so, you know, what I went then and did is I found Metro Senior's obituary, where amongst his grandsons, it lists two different Joes. Anyway, that's not necessarily relevant to everything.
Maybe there's been a Joseph further on, and this is, you know, that's his namesake, maybe, and they both felt the need to name their sons Joe. It's not that weird.
That happened here, but I just thought it was interesting and I would share it. I was tracking down a lead when I found all of that out, which was that I was trying to figure out where the hell Cody Dochev actually came from, because in the documentary, they almost make it sound like he was some poor Bulgarian immigrant when he got to Granby. As I was looking through it, I was like, I'm not sure, you know, I'm not sure if this was a deliberate misdirection of some kind or not, so I decided not to include the full segment. But to give you an idea of what my thought process was here, they refer to him as being a little Bulgarian, and you know, saying he was quick and that he was a good man. And then they also, the Thompson brothers, say, you know, he came here with next to nothing, and he's worked really hard to get where he is. And I was like, at first, when I first listened to it, I was like, could this be them trying to make it seem like Cody Dochev was, you know, I don't know the right term, but like make it seem like he was, you know, less prominent, less powerful than he actually was, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But at the end of the day, I couldn't tell if it was some kind of deliberate misdirection, as I said, or if this was, you know, just kind of a weird way of describing somebody.
But if it's listed as Metro being, I don't know, like a, first generation or migrant from Bulgaria, did they say? Could that have been his dad, Metro Senior? And he's second generation Bulgarian American? I'm lost.
Like, the reason I was trying to do this is because I was trying to establish if the Thompsons were reliable. I knew Harris wasn't, so I was trying to establish if the Thompsons were reliable witnesses, I guess.
Yeah.
Anyway, ultimately, it does not matter whether it was Joe or Cody who was trying to do the negotiations. What matters is that Marv did not raise the price immediately, nor without reason. He only raised the price after discovering that the town was going to rezone the property for the Dochefs, and he wanted to be fairly compensated. The zoning, however, was an issue all its own.
Unclosable deal.
After Marvin Heemeyer initially agreed to sell his property to the Dochefs for $250,000, they did not immediately go draft up a contract and start formalizing the sale.
No.
Instead, they went to the town and asked for permission to build an indoor concrete plant. And while
also important to note at this point, for those of us whose memory is not very good at all, so it has been valued higher, and Heemeyer, as a gesture of good faith, has brought down the cost, and he's prepared to sell it to Cody for $250,000 instead of the $270,000 I think they said it was valued at. So a gesture of good faith, and it seems to me like Cody is hesitant to go through with the sale for whatever reason. He's dragging his feet a little bit. So, Heemeyer, if you wanted to sell it, eventually you're going to get fed up with that, and you're going to start looking at other buyers, because if you wanted it, you draft up sales and contracts.
Brower's 2004 article frames this as something akin to just going and asking for a permit. It was actually a lot more complicated than that. Neither Marv's property nor the 2 acres adjacent to it were properly zoned for what the Dochefs were trying to do. And this meant that the town would have to rezone the area in order for them to build a concrete plant. Now, it's not typical to rezone such small amounts of acreage. You usually don't see 4 acres rezoned. Rather than forcing Dochef to go through the proper channels or find an area that was already zoned for this kind of use, the town of Granby offered him the ability to submit a request for a PDO. A PDO is a planned overlay district, and what this meant was that they could rezone that small area without having to submit a request to rezone the entire part of town. In doing this, the town was already giving Dochef a little bit of special treatment, because zoning's really not supposed to work that way. But according to the Dochef's version of events, after they found out that it was going to be rezoned for them, they just needed to go through the hearing process. They went to Marv and they said, hey, we'd like to buy the property. And that is when he raised the price to $375,000. Of course, in Heemeyer's account, he went and got the property appraised first. This was not out of nowhere. The Dochefs told Marv, you know what, that's too steep, we can't do that, and they went back to the drawing board. And as they were working out the plan to buy Marv's property, the Dochefs also were in negotiations to buy the 22 acres just west of it. This subdivision was zoned for business, and they would also be asking the town to rezone for light industrial use there. I also will say that the finer details of how the zoning laws work are a little bit unclear to me, but from what I understand, what was going on here was sketchy. Once the Dochefs had that 22-acre subdivision under contract, they went to Marv and they said, all right, we got another idea for you. How about instead of, $375,000 for your property, what if we give you 2 acres with highway frontage, so that's better access than you currently have, and you'll give us the 2 acres that you have. And as they told this story, Marv was at first receptive to this, but then, said, actually, I want you to build me a building on the property too. The Dochefs balked at this, with Joe telling Patrick Brower to give him that land with a huge building, it would have cost near $1 million. It didn't make sense. In addition, Marv wanted a contract laying out all of these terms and guaranteeing that he would get both the building and the land.
I think, to be fair, at this point, Heemeyer has been let down, and details have been changed, or people have backed out. I don't blame him for wanting all of this in writing. I think that's a very sensible thing to do at this point, especially when he's got Cody dragging his feet on sales and then coming back. If he's had the land appraised and it's come back at a higher value, I don't know what's happened. I don't know what has increased the value of this land in between, the 2 years, was it? But I don't think that's outrageous. I think it's a bit silly to stay attached to that original $250,000 and assume 2 years later it's totally fine for you to re-pick up that agreement and be like, oh, I've made up my mind now. I know it's taken 2 years, but I'd like to buy it.
Susie Dochev then told him that because they didn't have the permit yet, and they also technically hadn't purchased the property, they couldn't give him that contract. The way it's phrased and framed in the article, Marv comes across as being greedy and unreasonable. But when you break it down, that's really not the case.
No.
If we look at the price change, the Dochefs were negotiating with Heemeyer based on the value of the property as it was zoned at the time. But when they initiated the zoning process, Marv knew that a success would mean a significant shift in the property value. He did the correct thing and went and got it appraised given the new zoning and then presented that appraisal price to the Dochefs.
I don't think that's outrageous.
His reaction to the proposed land swap wasn't unreasonable either, considering that Marv would be giving up 2 acres of developed land with 2 buildings in exchange for 2 acres of undeveloped land. There's also a pretty significant irony in Joe's assessment that this didn't make sense because giving him 2 acres and a building would have cost near $1 million, given that he was unwilling to pay even $400,000 for 2 acres and a building. Finally, there's nothing irrational about Marv asking for a contract guaranteeing the terms of the land swap.
Nothing.
That's just how business deals work.
And
it should also be noted that Marv's concerns were not limited to proper compensation. He genuinely did not want to have his business downwind of a concrete plant. And if they were going to build a concrete plant anyway, then he didn't want to be stuck there. From his perspective, this could all just be a ruse to keep him from opposing the rezoning. And then, when it was too late, the Dochefs could just back out and say, hey, sorry, there was never a formal contract. Marv's concern here was that he could end up being left with a very dusty, lower value property than what he had under the current zoning laws. For that reason, he was well within his rights to want assurances. Ultimately, the Dochefs were unwilling to give him anything in writing, so Marv told them that he was going to oppose the rezoning and the concrete plant all the way to the end. According to Joe Dochev, from that point on, Marv was not negotiable to anything. We could have given him the whole subdivision and he wouldn't have gone for it. At the same time, notices about the rezoning, which was going to require several public hearings per the town's bylaws, were beginning to show up at Marv's door. This prompted him to head down to the town hall to ask about any building permits for the property next door. What he received was a copy of a permit for a water storage tank, which was issued at a fee of $5,000. I'm not particularly familiar with building permits, but that sounds high. According to a Grant County document designed for estimating building fees, that's the kind of money that you would pay to get a permit on a structure valued at over $1 million in 2024. Marv also noticed that the permit had a rather interesting cover letter, which stated that the water tank was in no way related to the as of yet unapproved PDO. In his mind, the only reason to clarify that would be because it was related to the PDO. It could be possible that the water tank would be useful to the Dochefs, concrete plant or not, but the way Marv was seeing it, they were starting to build every piece of their concrete plant that didn't require rezoning. Now, as I said, because zoning is a matter of public interest, the town bylaws required that they have several hearings so people could attend, voice their concerns, and then they could deliberate. And in every single case, those hearings were opposed, with the opposition led by Marvin Heemeyer. Marv was not the only person in town opposed to the concrete plant, but as one of the people who would be most affected by it, he sort of undertook a leadership role. He cited the excess noise, the dust, the traffic, and most importantly, the effects on air and water quality. These were concerns common to many of the residents of Granby, and Casey Farrell, who was serving on the board at the time, said that he thinks that Marv's objections even helped the town. Cody, on the other hand, at each meeting made promises that he would find a way to mitigate all of their concerns, and slowly but surely, whether because people just kind of were becoming okay with it, or because of the influence of the board, the number of people opposing dwindled further and further. And at that point, it seemed like things were going to go Cody Dochef's way. But then, Marvin Heemeyer showed up with a lawyer by the name of Dietz, and the board kicked everyone out of the session so that they could have their own private little conversation. When they finished, they decided to restart the whole process, according to Brower, because as the Town Planning Commission and Board of Trustees moved the Dochef's request along, the town board discovered it had made a mistake in its approval process. This is small town government code for we were trying to do something shady and then we got caught. As far as Dietz was concerned, at least in Heemeyer's recollection, this was an open and shut case.
I think that, why would you not? I think that's actually like the best thing. It's clever. Heemeyer bringing his own lawyer to these meetings and then starting from scratch, and big surprise, the lawyers uncovered that, you know, your council or whoever it is, they're not doing things as they're meant to. They're not doing things by the book, and then they have to hold their hands up and say, oops, oh, we made a mistake. You're right. Yeah, he's doing all the right things. As far as I'm concerned, he's doing everything right.
The result of this move was a delay in the approval process, during which time the Dochefs continued to prepare for the construction of their batch plant, completing the foundation by early fall of 2000. It was at this point that Heemeyer, acting on the advice of Dietz, launched a lawsuit against the town at the end of the year. While the lawsuit was spinning up in district court, the town actually just kind of kept moving things along, figuring that Marv Heemeyer would lose the lawsuit. In fact, they were so confident that they did yet another thing that was against the rules, which was change the final meeting, where they were supposed to vote on whether or not the rezoning would go through, to a preliminary planning meeting for the concrete plant. With that, the preliminary plans were approved in January of 2001, and the actual final approval for the rezoning was granted in April of that year. But
he's facing corruption. Like, I know I don't really know what I'm talking about, but, you know, trying to keep up with the facts that have been presented here. And I think, you know, this is very neutral. It's not biased in Heemeyer's favor. And there's obvious corruption here. They want Cody in possession of this land. They're making exceptions for him. The amount of people that are opposing this is slowly dwindling down until it's only going to be Marv, isn't it? Even the lawyers even found corruption going on there. They're not doing things the way that they're meant to be doing them. He's not wrong. There's corruption here.
Of course, because the preliminary plans had already been approved, that was just kind of a formality. And the reason that all of this was able to happen is because Heemeyer was not able to get an injunction against the Dochefs. The case was in court, but they would not stop them from moving forward with the construction. And this is actually typical when it comes to rezoning, because by this point, a lot of people have been paid for things. Stopping the construction is going to cause more problems than it's going to solve. So what they do is they just say, once it's finished, in a lot of cases, not all cases, but in a lot of cases is, yeah, the building can be there, you just can't use it for that purpose. At this point, with all other options exhausted, Marv Heemeyer's only hope was the courts.
Zoning trial. I mean, I'd be at wit's end. I don't know how Marv actually had... Well, I suppose it's his livelihood, it's his business. He's got no choice really but to keep fighting it. But it would be so exhausting. And it would get you down, wouldn't it? You know, it would feel hopeless, like you're fighting a never-ending battle. And I can understand why this would invoke so much emotion and so much resentment and kind of almost like a bit of a hatred for the authorities.
Despite losing his battle in the town hall, Heemeyer had yet to be defeated in the courts. And the legal fees were, you know, not exactly great for the Dochefs or the town. The Dochefs claim that wanting to just get all of this over and done with, resolve the issue, and move along with everything, they approached Marv in June of 2001 and gave him an offer. They told him that if he were to drop the lawsuit, they would give him the easement so he could finally connect to the sewer line. Marv hung up without an answer, and to be perfectly honest, I don't blame him for that reaction. This is presented as some kind of generous or at the very least reasonable compromise to the conflict, but if you look at it more closely, it's kind of absurd. It's hard to say for certain exactly what it was that happened in 1992 that kept Marv off of the sewer system. Like I said, there's a few different possibilities that range from it being a misunderstanding to it being a deliberate act, but Marv is adamant that he was stonewalled. Interestingly, Tread makes no mention of the dispute with Harris, which, as far as Marv is concerned, seems to have been the inciting incident. Instead, they only mention the option of him paying around $80,000 to set up a line that didn't cross anyone else's private property. And yet they do mention that the easement was an option later on in 2001, when the Dochefs went to say to him, hey, you know, if you drop the lawsuit, we'll give you your easement. It's a little hard to explain, but in Tread, there's kind of a bait and switch with this situation. Because they tell you that in 1992, Marv needed this easement. And building off of that, they tell you that the other option was Marv could pay like $80,000 to construct his own sewer line out to the sewer main without crossing any land, any private land. But then they talk about him needing an easement from the Dochefs, not Harris. And what they kind of do there is they conflate the later dispute with that original sewer line dispute. If you combine Marv's insistence that he was straight up denied access to the sewer line in 1992 with what appears to be the deliberate omission of the involvement of Harris, it makes me wonder what else may have been left out of the story. Marv was curious about that too, so he went down to the town hall and requested the meeting minutes from that 1992 sanitation department.
I bet they say they didn't take
And he says in the tapes that when he read through them, there was not a single mention of the maintenance easement. In his recollection, they had spent at least 15 minutes debating this at that meeting, and yet the secretary just didn't record it.
I'm not being funny, but even if it was just mentioned for 30 seconds, should have gone in the meetings. It's something that someone has brought up in protest or just for whatever relevance, actually. It needs to be recorded. I reckon the secretary's recorded it and it's been omitted.
Or possibly it had been struck from the record. Now, of course, the official record as it stands is going to show that it wasn't discussed, that they didn't mention a maintenance easement. Marv is saying they did. It's kind of hearsay. It's he said, she said. But taking all of that into account, what the Dochefs were essentially saying to Marv was, if you bend the knee, I'll give you something I had no right to keep from you in the first place.
Yeah. So it's a bit of a silly offering, isn't it, really? It doesn't have any value whatsoever. I cannot believe, so the reason that Heemeyer was attending this meeting in the first place was for the agreement, for the, what do you call it? For the link to the sewer. That's why he was there. So why would there be no mention of it in the minutes?
Continued to hold out, but the blows kept coming, and in April of 2002, he lost the lawsuit. At this point, Marv was, for all intents and purposes, trapped. The Dochefs refused to give him an easement. He couldn't connect to the sewer system otherwise without shelling out tens of thousands of dollars for the new connection, and beginning in the summer of 2002, the town started fining him for every single day he wouldn't connect. So Marv did what any man in his situation would do. He bought a bulldozer.
Oh, here we go to it. Unreasonable things. Is this what, I mean, the picture that's been painted up until now, it's painting Marv to not be an unreasonable person. Maybe he's had enough. Maybe he's just snapped. I think he's battling a corrupt council, and he's just at wit's end. I think a lot of us would be. Maybe not to the extent when we go and buy a bulldozer, but you would feel very trapped. What can you do? You've tried to be reasonable. You've tried gestures of goodwill.
Specifically, he bought a Komatsu D355A, which is an absolute beast of a machine that I am sure Whistling Diesel can explain better than I can. So, if you're watching this video the day it came out, his video might not be out yet, but if you're watching this video a week after it came out, it should be. Marv ultimately decided to shut down the business at the end of 2002, putting all of his equipment as well as the property itself up for auction, and then he just let Jesus take the wheel. And that's not an exaggeration, as we're about to see. At the auction, everything sold with the exception of the property itself and the bulldozer. And Marv took this as a sign from God. His work in Granby was not finished, and it involved the Komatsu. Having sold everything related to the business except for the buildings, he then chose to lease out the property to a trash company. I think it's actually called The Trash Company. It was around this time that Marv also discovered that the dozer fit perfectly through the doors of his garage. And when I say perfectly, I mean like within 2 inches of clearance on either side. And he took this as yet another sign from God that he was supposed to have that bulldozer out of sight. And then Marv just took the winter of 2002 into 2003 off. He spent it snowmobiling, hanging out with friends, just enjoying life as it came to him. And when the warm weather returned and his snowmobiling was finished, he headed on back down to Granby, where he built himself a little residential area inside of that garage. Beginning in the summer of 2003, Marv Heemeyer started adding things to his Komatsu. And when I say things, what I mean is that he created armor by welding 1/2-inch thick steel plates together into a hollow box, and filling that box with, ironically, concrete. Within the armor structure, he embedded video cameras, the lenses of which were protected by 3-inch thick bulletproof plastic shields. And pointing through a small hole in the back of the cabin, he mounted a .50 caliber rifle. Day in and day out, literally living inside of his workshop, Marv Heemeyer crafted a homemade tank. It was during this period, when he was locked inside of that garage most of the time, that his belief in a divine mission began to take shape. In October of 2003, he sold the property to the trash company for $400,000, and then leased out one of the garage bays for what he told them was an unfinished project. As part of this process, the owner, Travis Busey, had to get every building insured, which meant a walkthrough with the insurance company. Marv covered the half-finished dozer with a large tarp, told a little lie about what was under it, and then both Busey and the insurance adjuster just kind of walked on without asking any questions. And it was things like this that Marv took as signs that God was telling him to keep going. One of those supposed signs was that despite locking himself into that garage for hours or even days on end and refusing to tell anybody exactly what he was working on, nobody caught him. Interestingly, one article quotes local gun store owner Sean Nelson as saying, people knew he was building the armored bulldozer, but they didn't know why he was building it after the events of June 4th. Some people say that they specifically didn't know that he was doing it, and then others say that nobody knew that he was doing it, but it appears Sean Nelson did. And the list continued when he thought about it, because about a year prior, he and Trisha had broken up. She had picked up smoking again, and Marv was not happy about it. They got into a fight and ultimately decided to stop seeing each other. To Marv, this was just another sign as he realized that he had never been married. He had never had a family of his own. So if he were to go, nobody would be harmed. He wouldn't be leaving anybody without a provider. But that didn't mean that nobody would be there to miss him. Marv was not depressed, and he knew that he would be mourned. So Marv took steps to ensure that his father and siblings were provided for by selling all of his possessions and then transferring all liquid wealth to his father. In turn, John Heemeyer willed all of that wealth to his other 3 children. When Marv's father passed away on March 31st of 2004, all of Marv's money was then transferred to his siblings from his father. Now, some believe that the death of the elder Heemeyer was a breaking point for Marv, that after the death of his father, he felt he had nothing left to live for. But that doesn't seem to be the case. It seems that he had settled on this course of action long beforehand. And I say that because Marv's unorthodox estate management had the secondary effect of screwing Heemeyer's targets out of any recuperation. Because he had given up everything he owned prior to causing any damage to anybody's property, and then that money had not just been transferred once, but twice, and the second time through a will, there was no way that anybody was getting their hands on it.
Oh, this part is very calculated by Marv, isn't it? I'm interested in knowing, so we've heard an awful lot about Marv as a person from friends and people that knew him years prior to this. I'm interested in knowing if his personality had changed towards the end, towards, the incident. Because, like, we're told here that he keeps himself in his workshop for hours at a time, and all he's doing is making these mods to Killdozer. I'm wondering, just, with the mention of being so adamant as well that this is a mission from God, I'm sensing some mental health crisis going on here. He's broke up with his partner, long-term partner. His father's died. His oldest brother, I think they said, he's just passed away. That's a lot. That's the tipping point for a lot of people. Can be any of those individually. And an awful lot has happened in a short space of time. All the dealings with the councils, and all of these, that's a lot. That is a lot for any one person to deal with, even individually, and then you throw them all together. It seems like, I know they mentioned he wasn't depressed. No, it doesn't necessarily have to be depressed. It's just I would question, what is Heemeyer's mental health like at this point, because it sounds out of character. He's a rational man.
And because his siblings couldn't be held responsible for his actions, nothing of the $1 million+ that he had made off of selling what he owned would go to his enemies. And finally, Marv wasn't offered the opportunity to extend his lease past June of 2004. It wasn't any sort of malicious thing. It wasn't that he was being a bad tenant. It was just that the trash company needed the space for their own business.
Okay.
To Marv Heemeyer, that was as clear a sign as any.
Dear Killdozer, we're here.
Just after 2 p.m. on Friday, June 4th, 2004, Marvin Heemeyer's modified Komatsu D355A began its path of destruction.
Oh, no.
The first stop was Cody Dochev, the man that Marv felt was most responsible for his woes. There was a brief skirmish as the dozer attacked the first target, which was the concrete plant. Gunfire was exchanged, and at one point, Marv rolled the bulldozer through a barrier behind which there were 3 police officers hiding. All 3 managed to get out of the way in time, but many people pointed out that had they not moved, they would have been killed.
Did they... I think, did he mention earlier that you know, he's not hiding necessarily, you know, his work on the Killdozer. Many people in the town are aware that he's building it at this point, and enough of the residents knew what, you know, the route he was going to take, the path he was inevitably going to take. So no one was, you know, a lot of people had ample opportunity to get out of the way, basically. But he's nearly run through, like, what, three policemen if they hadn't have got out the way. So did they anticipate Killdozer was coming in this direction, or?
That said, it should also be considered that Marv was driving approximately 3 miles per hour. Once satisfied with the damage, Marv plowed southwards onto Highway 40, which is known as Agate Avenue as it runs through Granby. Also, if by some miracle you are a Granby local watching this video and I pronounced that wrong, I am begging you, give me the correct pronunciation. I'm not intending to offend.
Hey, he says pronunciation as well. Apparently it's pronunciation. I say pronunciation.
I really would like to know how to pronounce the word. Anyway, as he headed east on Route 40, he took a little turn, a little detour off to the left, and then he, you know, demolished Mountain Parks Electric. Mountain Parks Electric is where by then former town board member Dick Brody worked. Immediately after this, he hit the building next door, which housed Maple Street Builders. It's unclear exactly what Marv's reasoning was for hitting that building, but it can be assumed that he felt they had, stood against him in some way. Marv then took a break from targeting businesses to go after what he felt was the heart of Granby's issues, the town hall. The town hall, however, also housed the town library. When Marv turned off of the gate onto Zero Street, there were a number of people, including children, who'd chosen to shelter inside the building. Because it was 2004 and you had to call or text everybody individually to tell them that there was an armored bulldozer rampaging through town, nobody really knew what was going on. They had just heard some commotion and gunshots. Marv drove up, hit the southwest corner of the building, and then proceeded to drive around the building to the back, where he started tearing up the lawn and playground area. During this time, the building was evacuated and nobody was harmed. Pulling on...
Well, why does he have to tear up the playground area? They're not on his hit list. Or the library. I can kind of understand the affiliation with, the town hall. But, other residents use it. Maybe the thought that going through Marv's head at this point is, this is the nest of corruption. Our town doesn't benefit from it. We suffer at the hands of it. So we know, let's attack the hornet's nest. Let's go for the town hall. But not the library or the playground.
Onto Jasper Avenue, Marv proceeded 1 block east before turning right onto First Street, where he demolished a corner office at Liberty Bank. It's believed that he was trying to make a point to a specific bank employee who was on the zoning board. From there, he turned...
Oh, if you can't demolish the bank because of one employee that works there. Oh, okay. Marv is snapped. It's a stressful time. He's definitely snapped. I can't get on board with this. No, not when it's demolishing like a bank just because one of the workers. Maybe there's more to it. Maybe he felt like the bank was refusing him loans, or I don't know.
Back onto a gate and traveled east for about a quarter of a mile, where he struck again. This time, the target was not a town board member or another business rival, but the press. Marv felt that Patrick Brower had treated him and his business unfairly for many years.
Wow.
Specifically, he pointed to an incident in which Brower said that he would do an article on Marv's shop. According to Heemeyer, Brower never stopped by the shop. According to Brower, Heemeyer wasn't there when he did. After caving in a portion of the news building, Heemeyer hit the road once more for another 2 blocks before traveling up to Jasper and then onto the property of Thompson Excavation. This, ultimately, was the true source of Marv's rage. Marv felt that the Thompsons, longtime residents and landowners in Granby and in 1992 entrenched in local government, were conspiring against him. Marv tore apart their offices, damaged a building that they rented to Excel Energy, which was next door, and then moved on to the home of the late Dick Thompson, whose widow still occupied it.
Oh, the Thompsons. Did he have any other reason to think that they were conspiring against him outside of, the original town meeting? And was there anything else? Because again, I'm hearing red flags of a mental health crisis, paranoia, messages from God, you know what I mean?
She had evacuated long before Heemeyer arrived and thus was uninjured. After taking out the Thompsons' property, he made his way over to the nearby independent propane facility. Ooh. And there, he began to take shots at the propane tanks with his .50 caliber rifle. However, Marv had failed to properly align the shielding with the barrel, so he was just kind of firing and hitting his own tank. This was probably the thing that Marv did that freaked people out the most, because police argued that had he managed to ignite one of the tanks, it would have put an entire senior living community that was across the street in danger. And in the
Oh, no. I'm kind of sympathetic to a point, but not now. This is actually out of character. This is quite a little bit, well, it's not just a little bit, it's demented, isn't it? Now, he's an amazing welder, and he's very meticulous with his detail. He does great craftsmanship. It sounds like very sloppy work to make that mistake in Killdozer with with the rifle on the back there, just basically firing at his own tank. That's another one. That's quite out of character. That sounds like a last-minute addition that's come about from some kind of psychosis. Maybe I'm being too sympathetic, and it just screams mental episode for me. It does.
Immediate aftermath, Brower used this as evidence that Marv intended to kill people, along with things like him hitting the library and him destroying the house of the widow Thompson. But on the other hand, if Marv's primary intention was to kill people, then a bulldozer was a really strange choice of a weapon. If you can turn a bulldozer into a tank, then you can probably assemble a simple pipe bomb. So it doesn't make sense to use the former if your primary goal is to cause mass casualties. If it's just that Marv didn't care if anybody died as a result of his actions, that's more defensible, but it can still be argued against. First of all, Heemeyer was driving very slowly, so nobody who was aware of his position and able to move out of the way was ever in any real danger.
But I can't help but think he would have been very, very aware of the scale of the damage or how many people were very much in danger if he had ignited those propane tanks. That's not just damage, that would have been a massacre.
There's also the fact that he hit the outdoor aesthetic features of the town hall first, which could be seen as his way of giving people time to evacuate. If we look at Thelma Thompson, Heemeyer knew that she'd have probably at least an hour before he was anywhere near her, and then by the time he did get there, he destroyed the buildings next to her first. As for the propane tanks, it really depends how much Marv knew about propane and propane accessories.
Do I look like I know what a
Killdozer
is? I just want a picture of a goddamn hot dog.
In order to...
I'm a big King of the Hill fan. So straight away, as soon as the word propane is mentioned, I'm hearing Hank Hill's voice in my head trying to tell me a tank of propane. Oh, I love that.
Ignite liquid propane, he'd have needed more heat than the bullet's collision with the propane tank would produce.
Oh, okay.
So all he would do is cause leaks. Those leaks could theoretically cause an explosion in the air, which would then go down into the tanks if ignited. But he had brought no
That's
ignition
assuming he knew
source,
that.
which suggests his goal was not to ignite the propane. Now, if he did for some reason think that shooting a propane tank would cause it to explode, that's a different story.
Yeah.
But given the care he showed in all of the other situations, where I mean, the guy like avoided even hitting anyone else's business. He really tried to only target his targets. He did actually scrape somebody else's business, but then he immediately diverted. So looking at that, it seems like Marv was going out of his way to avoid hurting anyone. And this suggests that Marv knew that shooting a propane tank would not ignite it. And if Marv...
But why would you shoot it then? What, to just to cause leaks and just be a pain to that business? What did the propane business have? What did he have against these? I'm very conflicted. I don't think there's actually an awful lot of logic gone on with this. I think he's running and he's being fueled on what I think sounds like, it's like a psychiatric episode, whatever you want to refer to it as, a bit of a mental breakdown. I don't think he's in his right mind. I think maybe when he's pre-planned this out a little bit earlier on, he's consciously made an effort to not involve innocent people. I will say that sounds very, very likely. And it seems very in character, actually. But there's a few bizarre details here that they just sound destructive and for no reason. It like the playground, the library. Maybe there's more to the propane tanks. I don't know.
Knew that shooting a propane tank would not cause it to explode, then he was probably trying to cause a leak. Leaks cost money, so if he had a reason to be upset with independent propane, which I couldn't tell if he did, but we could kind of assume that, I guess, but leaks cost money, and on top of that, there's the fact that it would cause a headache for the EPA. Now, why would Marv want to cause a headache for the EPA? Well, when the concrete plant was getting set up, he called the EPA to complain about things like the noise, and the dust, and the water supply, and after a while, the EPA just started sending his calls to voicemail. So, with all of the evidence that we have, everything that we know about the situation so far, it seems to me most probable that either Marv was trying to cost independent propane money, or that he was trying to cause a headache for the Environmental Protection Agency. Marv's final strike occurred back on Agate Avenue, where he tore through the side of Gamble's Appliances. Gamble's Appliances was, at the time, owned by Casey Farrell, who served on the board from 97 to 99, and thus was there during the whole zoning thing.
Yeah, but didn't he earlier have like a positive character reference? He had nothing but polite things to say about Marv, if I remember rightly.
He was also in favor of the rezoning, and Farrell believes that this is why he was targeted. What Farrell also believes is that Heemeyer was not aware of a certain structural aspect of Gamble's Appliances, its basement. As the dozer plowed through the building, one tread slipped into the basement, rendering the tank immobile. Now, it wasn't going to be going much further anyway, as just moments earlier, the coolant system had failed, and it was rapidly leaking black fluid. His mission complete, Marv went out on his own terms, making him the only fatality associated with the Killdozer. When the dust cleared, Granby was in shock, with residents unable to understand what they'd done to deserve this. But ultimately, people came to realize that Marv had not been making random attacks. Once people started to realize whose buildings had been hit, and especially after a list of names was found at Heemeyer's property, it all kind of came together.
I don't think the question is hero
In Marv's tapes, he outlines what he argues was a conspiracy against him at the lowest levels of government, organized by the Thompsons and executed by their associates. He believed that the Thompsons, being a prominent family in town, had planned to help their friend Cody get his property back and set up a new concrete plant.
Now, my question is, the Thompsons, maybe specifically, and Gus from earlier, I forget his surname. I think there is a reason why they are so in favor of Cody owning this land and, rezoning in his favor. What's the reason? And it's not just because they're friends. It never is. It's always money. What's the reason? Why do they want Cody in ownership instead of Marv? There is a reason, and you can see it very, very clearly. All these kind of dots, they all connect. I want to know why, because I think that's the big detail that hasn't been spoken about yet.
And when Marv swooped in and bought the property for more than Dochev was willing to pay, that caused problems. And Heemeyer also believed that because he had been unwilling to sell the property to Dochev for less than what Kleiner had promised him, they hatched a plan to keep him from ever being successful in Granby.
Right.
They withdrew offers to sell him land even at the prices they named so that he wouldn't have access to the sewer main. They refused a maintenance easement so that he would always be in violation of town ordinances, and they could...
That's the biggest one for me. I think that's so heinous that they didn't tell him that that would happen following that initial first meeting. Yeah, at this stage, this isn't just paranoia. It looks very much like there is a conspiracy. I mean, it might not be a very calculated one. It might just be very petty. But it's massively impacting Marv and his business.
Use that against him at any time. They wouldn't buy his property for anywhere near what it was worth, even when he gave them the appraisal, just so he'd be stuck there. They rezoned his land against his will and then fined him when he sued the board. They ordered him to shut down his business until he hooked up to the sewer system, and then they refused him an easement yet again.
And the body that he is meant to be complaining to, a little bit later on, completely ghost him and ignore him. What more can he do? Like, I think up until this point, this is disgusting treatment from low-level government.
And when he finally went to sell the place to somebody other than Dochev, they tried to force him to pay for the sewer line himself before finalizing it. Whether it was real or imagined, Marv Heemeyer genuinely believed that he was being targeted by a group of other business owners, and that they were using the government to do it. A lot of the narratives that paint Heemeyer in a bad light today do so by making it seem like this was all about money and pride for him. But that's not what Marv's motivation truly was.
No.
Even if it's assumed that the town was not in any way actually working against him, it wasn't about money, it wasn't about property, it was about showing members of a government that he perceived as corrupt that they were not invulnerable to the consequences of their actions. Now, of course, Marv likely allowed his distaste for government in general to color his perceptions of those around him. But even with that consideration, there's still a degree of fairness to Marv's arguments, and there's reasons to be skeptical of the narrative crafted by Broer. Maybe there was no conspiracy, and maybe Marv really was just a victim of a series of horrible misunderstandings. But that does not change the fact that something about this whole ordeal feels off. There are aspects of the story that don't fit together, omissions of relevant details, and a complete lack of contemporary objective journalism. I absolutely would not say that there's any proof that there was a conspiracy against Marv Heemeyer, but what I will also say is that under these circumstances, a conspiracy actually wouldn't be that odd.
No.
And I say that because much of the reason this story has so much controversy is the ending, not the things that led up to it. The fact of the matter is, this is just how small town governments are a lot of the time. You have families that have been around for such a long time that they have connections that run deeper than political parties, and they have influence that transcends election cycles. There are a lot of these good old boys clubs that Heemeyer and Spencer both talk about in the Tread documentary. They are all over the United States, and they do hand out favors to friends. It's also not uncommon to see money change hands in ways that don't necessarily line up. Like somebody might overpay a board member for their used pickup truck, then, a month later, the board member votes a certain way. In a lot of American small towns, there's this you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours kind of mentality. And that's at every level of the social contract. That's person to person, that is business owner to business owner, that is elected official to elected official. And I want to be clear, I don't think there's anything wrong with a small town governing itself. I strongly encourage these communities to celebrate their unique cultural traits and their history. Here in Phoenixville, Aiden and I are extremely vocal about preserving the historical sections of town, as well as keeping business local by preventing the big brands from coming into our main street. And also our Bridge Street, which is the actual main street. Main Street's kind of an avenue that it's the wrong way here, but you know what? That's how we like it. The problems only occur because people pay so little attention to local governments, which allows bad actors to get away with insane levels of corruption. We're currently seeing an issue unfold here in town where the board is trying to use eminent domain to force a property owner to give up his land to a developer so that that developer can build luxury apartments. That is an entirely improper use of eminent domain, being as it serves only to enrich one property owner at the expense of another. But that doesn't matter, they're trying to do it anyway. The only reason it's being held up right now and that it's not going through is that the landowner knows his rights and is actively standing up for himself. And if there's one thing that we can learn from the reasonable man forced to do unreasonable things, Marvin Heemeyer, it's that we need to do that not just for ourselves, but for each other as well. Had the community stood up for Marv during the zoning dispute when the town was absolutely, admittedly not following procedure, none of this would have happened. And I don't mean to suggest that the community of Granby, Colorado is responsible for what was done to Marv or what Marv chose to do. They too were victims of what was ultimately the board's failure to negotiate the situation. I only wish to express the belief that in order for small towns to be the incredible aspect of American life that they have the potential to be, we must be willing to look out for each other. And if need be, we must be willing to metaphorically bulldoze corruption so that another Marv Heemeyer doesn't have to do it literally. I will admit I usually don't craft my outros in quite so specific a manner, so this feels a little awkward, but with all that said, if you want to support what we're doing here at the Lore Lodge, you can subscribe to us on Patreon, or you can become a member here on YouTube for just $1 a month. That will get you access to a few cool things, like our drunk folklore / history show, Liquored Lore, that comes out once a month. We're actually shooting that this weekend, oh no. It will also get you access, now that I have finally made the leap into the 21st century and started taking my notes, by typing them. It'll get you access to the notes for all of these videos going forward. With all of that said, I'm Aiden Madison. Thanks for stopping by the Lore Lodge.
Oh my gosh, the Lore Lodge. I think that's an amazing channel. Okay. I'm quite conflicted here with my final thoughts. I think this chap, oh my gosh, what was his name? I feel so rude when I can't call people by their name because I forget their name. The chap here, the narrator, he summed it up quite nicely in, do I think it's an overreaction from Marv Heemeyer here? Yes, in the sense that it's an extreme reaction. I very much, and it's not to justify any of his actions, I very much get the sense, red flags, suggesting to me that this is a man driven to breaking point, very understandably. And on the other side of the coin, do I think his actions are justified? I don't think he should have ever been driven to this point. Do I think that he was right in his actions? No, I don't think he should have created Killdozer and went on his rampage. No. Fortunately, no one was hurt, but I think to say that it was calculated and he knew that no one was going to be hurt, I think that's a very big risk. I don't think you can ever guarantee that because it's a very destructive thing. It's very dangerous. Who do I think is at fault? I would put a lot of the blame on the corruption of these local councils. What do you call them? Town? What do you call them in America? Ours is just councils. And we probably have the same form of corruptions going on in our local councils. And I think the difference might be, though, because there's so many more of your small local councils in the US than there is over here in the UK. So I think maybe our government is better able to monitor their activity because there's less of them. But there's an awful lot more. Don't know if you guys know this, but the US is quite big. There's an awful lot more to monitor and keep an eye on. That must be very difficult to do. I think a lot of the responsibility of this, a lot of the blame does, the finger does get pointed at the council for the corruption, the bad treatment, I think, of Marv. He was just, he's been collateral damage in a corrupt system. And I think if anyone came along and swooped into that auction to bid on the property instead of Cody, I think anyone else was probably facing the same treatment that he got. Do I think there is a conspiracy where the town planned against him? I would say there's enough evidence to suggest, yes, I think they are conspiring against him. I don't know whether it ended up just being quite petty, as opposed to malicious, but at the end of the day, it's his business and his livelihood that's going to suffer for it, with all the fines and, you know, and just being blocked, pursuing, you know, no, whatever. Yeah, I think this is a rational, and initially a very rational man, a good-natured man that has been driven to extremes. He's been pushed to breaking point. A few things sound like they've happened over the last few years, and if the intention was always that he was going to take his life at the end of the rampage, you've got to assume there's a mental health crisis going on here. Could anyone have intervened? You know, it's kind of hard to say, isn't it? You don't really know who is close to him at this point. Enough people are aware that he's making Killdozer. I feel like there should have been a little bit more, you know, counteraction, you know. Hey Marv, how are you feeling? Is everything okay? Do you want to go and sit down and have a coffee? You can say. It's easy to look back and criticize and say X, Y, Z, isn't it? I'm very conflicted. I feel like Himaya was not treated very well. But at the same time, does it justify you rampaging through a small town with a tank Killdozer? No. Again, not to justify, but I do get the impression that there's a mental health crisis going on there. It's very interesting. I feel like I've been given an awful lot of information about a topic that I initially hadn't heard of before. So it's trying to retain all that information. Very, very interesting. The Law Lodge, incredibly well researched, and the information that is in this video is absolutely, I'm gobsmacked. It's very, very well researched, and it sounds like an amazing channel. I've thoroughly enjoyed watching this. So thank you so much, PlatinumLombax. Thank you for requesting this video, my lovely. Hopefully, a few of you are still with me at this point at the end. If you are, thank you for watching along with me. I didn't realize that this would have so much controversy attached to it. So hopefully that hasn't rattled many cages. I'm sure it probably has. But yeah, I feel very conflicted. And I think that's how a lot of people maybe come to the conclusion at the end of these stories. It's like, I think there's wrongdoings on both sides. Was the consequence extreme? Yes. But I don't think the entire blame lies with Himaya, with Marv Himaya here. I think the more you look for the detail, that has been very, very well presented by the Law Lodge here. You can start to see why that happened. Should it have happened? No, it shouldn't have ever got to that point. But yes, guys, I hope you enjoyed watching that along with me. Take care of yourselves, my lovelies, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.